Lewis has tattooed on his back and on the back of his helmet, "Still I rise." Whatever's thrown at him just seems to make him come back stronger. How do we even begin to digest a weekend like that? Well, I think the reality is, for me personally, I haven't digested it yet. Even went back yesterday morning to look through the data before I gave the debrief to the staff in the factory. It was a real roller coaster from the start of P1 not feeling like we were quite quick enough to finding our pace, finding our feet and going into qualifying and probably having the most dominant qualifying we've had all year, to then finding out a penalty for Lewis, and then an amazing drive from Lewis to come back through what was effectively 25 places of penalties to win that race. Some unbelievable drive, and I think we'll be talking about that for years. What exactly happened with Lewis's rear wing? Well, the simple answer is we failed to pass a test that we needed to pass. It's actually a bit more nuanced than that. Within the regulations, there's two things. There's the technical regulations, which is the rules that we need to pass, and there are things called technical directives, and they are issued by the FIA, and they're generally explanations as to how they're going to police those regulations. In this case, you've got the main plane of the rear wing and you've got a flap. And there's a rule that states there's a minimum gap between those wings and a maximum gap when the DRS opens. And that maximum gap is 85 millimetres. And that's written in those regulations. And that is something we actually passed. The wing wasn't more than 85, or the flap wasn't more than 85 millimetres away from the trailing edge. The reality was that we didn't pass the technical directive. So what's the difference? Well, within the technical directives, they specify how that measurement's going to be taken. And what they say is that we need to pass a test where they push a cylinder of 85 mil diameter into that gap, and they need to be able to push that through with a minimum force of 10 newtons. And the reality is that while we passed that over the majority of the span, there was a small place where we didn't pass that test. Now, just to put this into perspective, we obviously try to make sure our cars are legal at all times. We don't want to take these sorts of penalties. So what we do is we test those wings in T&D, in test and development. And in those tests, we do exactly the same test, but we do it with a much higher force, so 30 newtons, and we pass. We also test those wings when we get to the track. So on a Wednesday morning or a Thursday morning, we go through all those suites to test, and again, that wing passed. And we also know that that wing has passed on previous occasions on previous races. So for some reason, we are yet to understand, we had some sort of reliability issue, whether that was damage on track, whether that was something coming loose. We're yet to find that out because that wing's been sort of bagged up and sort of FIA sealed. Why did we decide not to appeal Lewis's disqualification from qualifying? Well, once we'd heard what the outcome was, we got a group of the sort of senior team together and we talked through what the various outcomes from that would be. We had the letter from the stewards which explained their decision. Their decision was pretty clear. In that, it said that they didn't think we deliberately tried to breach the rules, that potentially there was some sort of reliability issue. But what actually happened is, however you looked at it, we could not pass the test that needed to be passed, and therefore they were going to introduce a penalty. So looking at that, we had to decide if we appealed that, were we likely to win or not? And what we determined is our chances of winning were not 100%, they weren't zero, probably closer to zero than to 100%. But the reality is if we'd have decided to appeal, we would have done something called racing under appeal. And the consequences of that is we would have started from the front in sprint qualifying, we'd have gone through the whole race weekend, and we'd have ended up in a court of appeal. If that court of appeal had upheld the original ruling, we'd have lost all our points from the weekend. So that's what we were risking. On the flip side, we did our usual strategic calculations, and within James Vow's strategy team, we came back with the conclusion that we thought we could get back up to 10th in the sprint qualifying, take the power unit penalty and therefore start 15th in the race, and we predicted we could get up to maybe 4th position. And that would be a significant number of points. We would have given away the points that we would have got for sprint qualifying potentially, but we'd have probably got back to what we thought was a reasonable place given we were also going to take the engine penalty. So it became a sort of trade between risk and reward, and in the end we decided the best solution, or the optimum solution for us, was to not take the risk of appealing the penalty. How important is team spirit on a weekend where everything goes against you? Well, the obvious answer is it's massive. I couldn't be more proud of the way the team handled itself this weekend. Those that had to get involved with the penalty with Lewis did a really good job with the stewards and explaining our position. Those that had to get the car ready, engineer the car, prep us for what we needed to do in the race weekend, did their jobs and did a brilliant job. Lewis has tattooed on his back and on the back of his helmet, "Still I rise." Whatever's thrown at him just seems to make him come back stronger. And he came back and he drove the wheels off that car. To take 25 places of penalties, come back and win the race in the style he won it is amazing. And I don't think we're going to see a drive like that for potentially years to come. I've known Lewis a long time and I've seen him do things like that. It's just amazing to watch. How much did the team benefit from the new engine for Lewis? Well, I know Toto's already talked in the press about power unit degradation. The reality is all power units degrade, particularly racing engines, over their life. So fitting a new PU gives you a little bit more punch, gives you a little bit extra off the corner exits, and Lewis said he could feel that. But the reality is we had a good car this weekend, and we had a driver that was going to make the most of it. Do we think we could have pulled off the one-stop strategy with Valtteri, as he suggested over the radio? I think the answer in hindsight is probably yes, but it's really difficult to know that at that stage of the race. We didn't know how much tyre wear we had on the previous stints at that stage. We didn't know that Max's tyres would drop off at the end. So if we'd have kept Valtteri out with his tyres degrading at the end of the race and had fast Red Bulls coming up behind, he could have ended up dropping to fourth. So at that position, we were trying to think, what's our best strategy? Is it take a risk and potentially get overtaken by fast cars at the end? Or do we try and bank that third position? And that's what we decided to do. Why didn't we wait longer before pitting Lewis for the second time? Well, the reality, in an ideal world, we'd have gone for the undercut. We were close up behind Max and we'd have pulled the trigger as soon as we could, tried to get the undercut and therefore track position. He took that before we had an opportunity. So from that position, what you want to do is try and go long, try and offset the tyre strategy. But Lewis was coming rapidly up to a set of back markers, which he could have lost a lot of time to. We knew he was quick. We knew he was pushing Max really hard. And so we created as much offset as we could without losing track time behind back markers. And that's the answer. Did we pit Valtteri under the VSC intentionally, or did we get lucky? At that stage of the race, when Perez was pitting, we were also looking to pit Valtteri. But we'd had a message come over the FIA system saying that part of the gantry had fallen onto the track. As it happened, it wasn't part of the gantry. It was actually debris off Stroll's car that was on the track. And we thought at that point there's a possibility there'd be a VSC or potentially a safety car. Because that reduces your time in the pits, that obviously gives you a strategic advantage if you can pit during either a VSC or a safety car. So we just waited to see what would happen because it wasn't going to change our race. And as it happened, there was a VSC. That meant we could pit Valtteri with much less time loss in the pits. And that brought us out in front of Perez, which is obviously a net win for us. Has this race given us a better indication of what we can expect over the last three? I think the real answer is, in some ways, is no. I think we've tried all year to predict where we're going to be strong and where we're going to be less strong. The reality is we're fighting in a really tight fight with Red Bull. The differences between the two cars are very small. And the differences in the surface, the layout of the track, the weather are all enough to be able to swing us from favourable to us to favourable to them. I think what we have seen is we've seen two drivers that are really pushing to try and bring these championships back home to Brackley and to Brixworth. And what we need to do is to give them a car over the next three races that they can fight with in the best way. Why was Bono holding an egg in the team photo? Well, if I'd have been asked that question a couple of hours ago, I wouldn't have been able to give you an answer. I've since been told. Apparently Lewis's favourite film is Cool Runnings, and it's a reference to that. And if you've not seen it, it's about a Jamaican bobsled team competing against teams that are established and have been doing that for years. And in the film, you've got the Swiss team. They're the top team. And the Jamaican bobsled team spot them, they look at the way they work and they decide that the right thing to do is to copy them, to try and emulate them because they think that will make them faster. But they realise partway through the film that that doesn't work for them, that they need to return to their own roots, their own culture and do things their own way. And in the film there's a character called Sanka and he has an egg and he holds this egg and he makes them all kiss it before they do their run on the bobsled. And I think the bit at the end of the film where the bobsled crashes and they're all in pain on the floor, the only bit they're worried about is the egg. And I think it's a film I like, and it's a film about culture and about values, and I think that's really important. And I think in some ways it kind of mirrors some of the things we've been through this weekend, and it shows how strong our values are, how strong our culture is, and particularly about the way Lewis approached that weekend. Stop. No, let's not say that. Do you like that? Thank you very much for all of your questions. I think I've said before in these videos, this is something we actually really enjoy. It's really nice being able to talk about what we do. So we look forward to answering more of your questions with another member of the team after the next race in Qatar.